And welcome to part B of church. I love the last couple of weeks how we've been talking about being the church, and particularly as a Baptist church, and some of the, the history behind that. And as Aidan kind of wrapped that up today with sort of a, second and third order and the wrestle that it comes to be church, that's the beauty of what we're about and what we've always been about for a long time. So I think it's been really great that we have our AGM today, when we have spent a couple of weeks, and last week in particular, focusing on some of our history and some of our characteristics, what makes us who we are, and then how we go about these kind of processes. So welcome, thanks for coming along to those of you that have come in person, and welcome to those people that are streaming, joining us online. Great to have technology that enables people to do that. I did probably not do a great enough job of my calendar planning. I kind of didn't know that it was a long weekend per se, with Anzac Day being on Thursday. So there's a lot of people that are like, yeah, we're taking Friday off, not coming back till Sunday afternoon. So if you're stuck in traffic on the Auckland Southern Motorway right now, then that's good. That's probably going to be this afternoon, I imagine, for people that have been away for a few days. I often reflect upon these kind of AGMs and think to myself, the best environment to do an AGM would be around the dinner table. And rather than me speaking to you looking in this kind of environment. For those of you that know something of our family in the last number of years has grown quickly with grandchildren. We have 4 children, 3 of them are married, our youngest has a girlfriend, and our first 3 kids combined have 5 kids. And in January, when they were all here, our house is like, it's bedlam, right? For those of you who will understand that if you've got children and grandchildren, but it's a nice bedlam. And when we have our sort of family dinners, it's full, it's crazy, but as a family, that's part of the joy of it. And I often think for an AGM, wouldn't it be nice if we were just in someone's home and it was just kind of bedlam and everyone's talking and everyone's kind of on the same page of being what Aidan talked about this morning, being family. It's the wrestle of family, where brothers and sisters are kind of talking about, what God has done in and through us for one particular year, but as I always say, one particular year that is built upon the foundations of 72 others. So we are talking today about our annual report from 2023, just 1 year. And when I ask people to write their summaries, I often say to them, it's not a vision report. And I often have to edit them because they're like, we did this in 2023 and we're really looking forward to this. And I'm like, no, the annual report is not a vision document. It's not a document that we lay out our plans for the future. It's actually a review backwards. So every year we look back at 2023, knowing that there is more to come and knowing that everything that we do is building upon itself, but it is a reflection of the activity of one particular year. So I love that the activity that we have as a family is reflected in our annual report. And I hope that you've all had the opportunity to have a read of it and reflect upon it, because it is not only the annual report for the church per se, but everything that's been birthed out of the church. It's also the AGM for Equip, for Windsor Park Harbour Limited and Windsor Park Life Care Trust, which is why you see in our annual reports that we report all 4 entities and we report their activities and kind of what they've been up to. And somebody said to me this morning, in fact it was Clay down here that said, can I read all of the annual reports of the church? I said, well, that would be 73 different documents. And if you know Clay, he would actually read all 73 of them. But it'll be interesting to kind of go back as I do. I keep a collection in my office of all of the annual reports as far back as we can go back. In fact, we haven't been able to find ones from our earlier days. We only have annual reports for about the last 40 years. I would love to get hold of the early ones, but I'm not sure how to get hold of them. If they aren't around, they aren't certainly held in the cloud anywhere, unless they were burnt and then they literally went to the clouds. But this is, the journey that we are all on, and represented here today are some of you that have been part of this journey for a long time, much longer than I, and much longer than a lot of other people. And there are some people here today who haven't been part of this journey for very long, and that's the beauty of who we are as a community. And there are some of you that have sat through annual reports for a lot of years, or AGMs, you've been to many of them. And there are some to whom this is the first AGM. In fact, put your hand up if this is the first AGM you've ever been to of Windsor Park. Oh, be proud of it. Put your hand up, Lucas. Oh, yeah. Well, let's welcome our first-timers. And let's make sure that they go out with a warm feeling of what an annual general meeting is. I hope that you've all, as you came in the door, were able to record your attendance on the sheets out there. And if you haven't done that, you can do that on your way out. Again, for us, just part of the process is making sure that we record people that are at the AGM as well. Normally, it would be for decision-making purposes, but as Margaret will explain soon, we actually don't need to make any decisions at this annual general meeting. For the first time actually in my history, we aren't voting on any new elders or any new governance team appointments, just because of a range of reasons, but largely because of our cyclical nature of how that works. So there isn't actually any sort of corporate decision making to be made. So what we do as part of this AGM is that we do a formal process. The annual report is a formal document. It is a document that is written both for the purposes of our church to record what has gone on and the operations of who we are. So it forms a historical record for us, but in a more regulatory environment that we live in now with charity services, it also forms an official record that gets published online for charity services. Actually, anyone in the world could have a look at our annual reports now. And for charity services here in New Zealand, it's a check for them to make sure that we are being true to our constitution, being true to our charitable purposes and who we say that we are. So it's a more important document these days as far as the regulatory environment goes for non-profit organisations in New Zealand, which is why we are working hard at being a little bit more analytical about our annual report. And you'll see in this one in particular, there is more kind of numbers. These are the amount of people that are involved. These are the kind of services that we do. This is how many people we are impacting, which is not a perfect science for us to record. In many ways, it's a best guesstimate of our services because we can't always record everything. But I think you'll agree that there is a lot of good numbers in there about who we are and remaining true to the purposes of what our forebears established our church to be. And I often talk about that, and I often reflect upon that myself. I go back to the earliest documents that we can find, the story of who we are. And I write that story. I keep adding to that story. You'll know a couple of years ago we added our story out to the wall out in Cafe Windsor there. Our story is important because it is the involvement of many people with many gifts and abilities as they come in and out of our community, contributing to something that is growing much bigger than any of us. So I recognize my role as part of that. As a leader is to be here for the season that is my season, building upon the foundations of previous leaders that have led our church. And over my time, I've sought to articulate that, who have been the leaders or significant staff over the last 73 years, and we keep building as we gather more information about that, because that's important for us. And we record what happens in a year, knowing that in the future, people will look back on this and think, okay, that was that season. What are the themes that emerge for us? So the formal process is simply to go through our annual report, accept our annual report, and then to look at our governance teams. And as Margaret will explain, to ratify our governance teams. And then the formal process closes, and then informally, we talk about various things. And given that it's Sunday afternoon, we don't like to go on too long, but today I want to welcome Joe and Kennedy, and I'll introduce them to you a little bit later. As I have mentioned, they are from Strategic Property, which is the consultants that we've been using to kind of guide us through our property process that we started a couple of years ago. So Joe will come and explain what that process is, I guess from an outside voice as well. And thank to you two for coming back from long weekends to be here with us at our AGM. And I'll introduce you guys just a little bit later as well. So I want to hand over to Margaret Coyle. Now this is a change. There's one change. We've had a change in the chair of our elders board. Ian Bradley stepped down with his rotational stand down, and we appreciated his leadership and guidance for the last, I think, 2 terms, so actually 12 years, 2 lots of 6. He's taking a well-deserved rest now as chair of Equip. A much easier task, I'm sure, Naomi, than chair of the church, having to keep me in line. But Margaret Coyle has been the deputy chair of our elders for the last couple of years and has stepped into Ian's role now. So Margaret's going to introduce herself. Some of you may not know who Margaret is, but she represents the elders team, and she'll introduce herself and tell us a little bit about who she is and take us through the formal process. I'm just going to sit quietly in the front there. Margaret's like, can you sit in case anyone's got tricky questions? So I'll do that. So why don't you welcome Margaret?
Thanks, Grant. Good morning, afternoon, everyone. Hello, family. Nice to see you all. I am indeed Margaret Coyle, and I'm chairing the elders at the moment. So I just want to add my welcome to Grant's welcome. Thank you so much for making the time to be here. I know that it's beautifully sunny outside, and sometimes you're like, oh, I just want to be in the sun. But thanks for being here, showing your commitment to the church and the things that we're doing. Appreciate that. So yes, before I start on the formalities, I am aware that I might be a familiar face to some of you, but a lot of you won't know who I am, so let me just introduce myself. I've been coming to Windsor Park since we moved to Auckland in 2011, so I guess that's about 13 years. I attend the 9 a.m. service typically with my family. We sit right just behind where Caleb is right now usually. We've got 4 kids, so Ezra's in year 13, he goes to youth and he leads in Tribe. Lily Joy's in year 11, so she also goes to youth and leads in Windsor Kids. Indy's year 8, you may have seen her, she came a couple of weeks ago, she spoke and shared her testimony from Tribe Camp, so that's my Indy, so she's in year 8, she goes to Tribe, and Mila's in year 6 and she goes to Windsor Kids. So we cover a good spectrum of kind of some of the family type ministries in Windsor Park. When I'm not at church or not busy with my kids, I work in a non-for-profit Christian organisation called Tandem Ministries, and I lead the HR team there amongst other things. And also, me personally, I like to meet new people, so if you haven't met me before, come and say hello, because I'd love to meet you. That would be lovely. Come and see me afterwards. So, that's me. Get that introduction out of the way, and it's now 12:47, so whoever's taking minutes, I am now officially opening the formal part of our Windsor Park Baptist Church annual general meeting. As Grant said, our agenda today is going to cover the annual report and then just our governance teams. It won't take us very long. And once I finish that, I'll hand back to Grant, who's going to lead us through an informal discussion time. So the annual report, I'm going to present that first. I think there's a screenshot of it there. It's available online in the Windsor Park website or in a hard copy at special request, I believe. As I read through it recently, once it came out, I was just so encouraged by all the stories of the impact that Windsor Park is having in the community, and I was just really heartened by all of that and encouraged. And I'm so excited to be part of this really thriving community and dynamic church, and so I hope that you also feel that way. I'm so proud of the work that we're doing, and I hope that's true for you as well. So, if you've read the annual report, does anyone have, I'm just opening the floor to you now for any comments that you would like to make, whether they be things that were extremely encouraging to you or perhaps some questions that you might have. Now is the time to spit them out. I don't wait for long, just by the way. That's another thing about me. I'm not a super patient person, so I try. But if no one has anything burning that they want to say, we won't just stand here for ages waiting. Great. Well, on that note, then, I would like to pass the motion to accept the 2023 annual report as what? As presented. I'm like, I didn't know the words. I was talking to Grant before. What kind of words do I have to use to do this? So, who would like to second my motion to accept the annual general report as presented? There we go. Thank you. Stephanie Allison, for the note taker, has seconded the motion. And then let's just do a verbal acceptance of it. So, all in favour of the 2023 annual general report as being presented, say aye. Thank you. Anyone not in favour, say nay. Great. There we go. We'll call that presented and accepted. That's cool. If you haven't read it, you really should. It is really cool to read. So the governance teams, we have 4 or 5 of them, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them that we're going to go through. We're just going to put up on the screen who each is in each governance team, and at the end we'll just ratify them all at once. So the first is our elders. So Grant is the senior pastor, and they're listed here in order of when they're sort of rolling over, because as Grant mentioned, it's a cycle, so it's a 2-year term, and you can do 3 2-year terms, so 6 years effectively, and then you take a break. So we've got Anna Yu and Stephanie Allison, both in their 2nd year of their 3rd term. Then we've got myself, John Tucker and Sunny. We're in our 2nd year of our 2nd term. We've got Doug Reed, Daniel Ho, Sharon Taylor and Caleb Waddell, who are in their 2nd year of their 1st term. So this is actually the first time in Grant's understanding that we've never had new elders to present and be voted in. So enjoy being a part of a unique AGM today. However, we are always talking with people about becoming elders so that we've got people in the pipelines for when because we do roll over quite quickly, so we're always looking for new elders. So if that's something that you're interested in, then come and chat to me or Grant or anyone on this list, and we would love to have a chat with you about what that could look like. If you wonder what the elders do, I think our number one main responsibility is to provide support and accountability for Grant. And then just, whatever that entails. With a big church like Windsor Park, there's a lot of the management happens in the staff arena, and we just are providing that support and hopefully encouragement to Grant as well. Any comments on our elders or questions about that? Cool. All right, our second group that we're going to ratify today is our Equip trustees. So Naomi Cohen is the CEO of Equip, as you all know, and we've got Ian as the chair, we've got Dr. Andrew Howie, Lisa Haythornthwaite, Alan Grav, Reverend John Marsden is the kaumatua, John Woodward, Amber Roper, Grant Harris, and Anna Yu. She sits on as the elders representative. Any comments or questions on those people? No? Cool. Okay, our next group of people is the Windsor Park Hub Limited. Our general manager is Shelley Thornton over there somewhere. And then we've got Mike Mackey as the chair, Ben Harris, Joel Umali, Alan Amy, Grant Harris, and Sunny Jing as the elders representative. All good? Great. And then our last is the Life Care Trust. I think, are they trustees? Yeah, they're trustees. So that's managed by Sarah Clark. Debbie Trent is the chair. Ewan Philpott, Carolyn Wern, Danielle Olivier, Natasha Taylor, John Bradley, and Grant Harris. So those are the people who oversee the Life Care Trust. They're the trustees. Any comments on that, crowd? Cool. So, in that case, I'll present all of our 4 different entities and their trustees as presented, and we need to ratify them together. So basically that means everyone in favour of who we have on this screen as all of our representatives, if you're happy with that, say aye. Aye. Thank you. And if you're against that, you can say nay. Cool. Great, that's done. That's the business part, so easy. Now we get to go to the fun part where we get to have some chit-chat and discussion about all the things that are happening with our property, amongst other things. Before I hand back to, it's 12:53. We're closing the formal AGM, closed. But before I hand back to Grant, I would just like to say on behalf of the elders and as a representative of you guys as members of the church, a massive thank you to Grant for the way that he leads us and the way that he leads us spiritually and towards God, and just as a community as well. I think you can all agree with me and give Grant a huge round of applause to say how much we appreciate him. Thanks, Grant.
Thank you, and thanks, Margaret. 6 minutes. So that's a good timing for our actual formal part of our annual general meeting and our annual report. Also, just want to make a few comments as Margaret sort of went through the names of our governors. Reflected in our annual report is also lots of different staff changes that we have, and every year we sort of have a rumble of staff changes for a whole bunch of reasons, and as well as in our governance teams, and there really has been some significant ones over the last year. Robin McKenzie, who was on our front desk, stepped down first quarter of last year as well, so big changes for us. Robin had been at the front desk for 23 and a half years, I think it is. Basically, Robin knew everything about everyone and was the most discreet person that we have in the church. So Robin, I know you're at the AGM, and I really want to show our appreciation to Robin for that role as well. And also you would have seen, as we ran through the list of governors, that there was one change in our Life Care Trust that was also worth noticing, with the leadership transition from Sue to Sarah Clark, who now oversees the Life Care Trust. And Sue was really the pioneer of the Life Care Trust and did a great job for 5 years, kind of setting that up to the stage where leadership transition could occur, and has now stepped away from that and doesn't even sit as part of the board, as like a special kind of ring-in if needed, I think, for Sue. So also for Sue, we just want to, I guess, publicly acknowledge the role that you did with that. And also the role, I think, Peter as chair also. Did we transition in the last year? I can't remember. Well, it was the year before that. Okay, well, thanks for the year before that, Peter, because it was really Peter and Sue that got things going, and now that's transitioned. Transitions are always, I guess, for those of us that have the privilege of working here, we kind of see them a little bit firsthand, and for a lot of you, you see the continuity of things kind of flowing through as well. And also want to acknowledge, down the back there, we just had a big transition this year. It'll be in next year's annual report, but Roger Jensen finished with us on staff as our accountant and is now completely out of that role. Roger, don't say hallelujah too loudly. Recently replaced by Joyce Chang, who we are enjoying getting to know over the last month, but I also want to acknowledge Roger's role, particularly managing the church during COVID. Roger came into the role about 6 years ago, hoping that he'll be around for 2 years to lead some change in our processes and things like that. And Roger tried to retire several times, and I always just declined it. But this year it sort of worked out okay. But Roger, I don't want to underestimate the amount of work that you had to do during COVID, and through the uncertainties that brought us financially as a community, and the management that you did in that. So again, I want to acknowledge the role that Roger did in that area. And there was also a bunch of other transitions that I kind of talked about in my report. So by mentioning some of them, I know that I miss others, but we certainly acknowledge that our team is one that continues to morph and grow all the time, every year, but we are blessed to be part of the team as well, and blessed to, as staff, as I often say, we are blessed to call this our workplaces, and thank those of you that support the church financially. It does enable us to be able to spend the time that we have as our jobs to work here, but as our jobs, as our calling, but really I think for all of us as our heart. We believe in what this place is about, and it's a privilege for us, and we're grateful for the support that you provide that enables us to be on staff as part of the church. So what I want to do now is, talk about our property, but also at the end of this, just to get you kind of thinking about that, I will provide a couple of thoughts for us going forward, but it is also a discussion. It's a very unnatural discussion because we are seated like this in kind of a auditorium style thing, but if you have questions that you want to ask about who we are or what's going on in our ministries, most of our staff are here, and if you have questions that you kind of want to raise publicly about anything, then we are very open for any sort of questions. So if you're thinking about those towards the end, I might not be able to answer all of them, but I'll refer them to people that are more appropriate for those areas for who we are as a church. So what we do want to do is talk about property, because it is a big area for us. It's always been a big area for us, and it will continue to be a big area for us. You'll know by context that a number of years ago, probably coming up 3 years ago, we kind of identified that, our buildings, as great as what they are starting to deteriorate and have certain restrictions associated with them. I've often said to those of you that have been around when we transitioned from Murray's Bay to Windsor Park, it was, a bold, courageous move which required a bunch of you personally to get involved, and I think it's one of our institutional stories that about 10 people mortgaged their own homes to enable us to get to the site. So that courage and that vision for who we are as a church is part of our history, part of our story. But that was coming up 27 years ago, and the excitement of buying a pub was palpable for you guys. You could smell the beer in the carpet. I've heard all the stories about that. You'll know that this was a flat roof when you came in here, and I've seen the pictures, and it's an incredible story for us. But the reality is that our buildings are now coming up a 50-year-old ex-tavern complex, which still has a beer pit out the back under our creche, to be honest, which no one's allowed in. But we are hoping that there might be some buried treasure in there at some point. We'll find it. But it means that to take care of our buildings or to use our buildings has increasingly in recent years become a very expensive option for us. And as things continue to deteriorate, we really have the choices to make around, do we keep raising our repairs and maintenance budget every year, and more so every year, or do we look at something a little bit more systemic as far as the change for our buildings go? So about 3 years ago, we started running through that process. We started asking questions about, are we committed to the site, for example? Are we committed to these buildings? Is there ways for us to be able to rebuild in some way? Do we alter? Do we renovate? Do we do all these sorts of things? And so over the last number of years, we've been answering those questions as best as we are able at the same time as we've been paying increasingly higher repairs and maintenance bills. There are various constraints to who we are now, to where we are now. You will remember a couple of examples that I've often mentioned is that a few years ago, we thought about extending this back wall of the auditorium out to allow a little more space, just out to the edge of the roof line. And we had to go to not the Environment Court, what's it called? The court, resource consent. Yeah, we had to go for resource consent and had to have a day in front of commissioners because one of our neighbours objected to that idea. We won the case and then lost the battle. It was an expensive battle for us to lose in many ways because we got the resource consent okay, and then when we were looking at building consent, the council said, yeah, that would be fine as long as you put a full sprinkler system through the whole building. And so basically they said, no, we're not going to allow you to do anything structurally until you put a full sprinkler through. We had 2 people come out and have a look at our buildings, and they were just like, we don't even know where to begin to start to quote you. But you are talking about hundreds of thousands, if not a million more, just to put sprinkler systems through our building. So we have various constraints around that. A couple of years ago, we had a small water leak, just a small water leak that was popping up through the concrete. It cost us $17,000 to find the water leak and then to fix it. At the same time, our water bills were going quite high. So they're just little examples that I often quote around some of the challenges that we face. And then there is the bigger picture around saying, so what do we want to leave for the next generation? For those of us that are kind of my age perhaps right now, what are the decisions that we are making that is enabling the next generation to have the tools and to be equipped in ways that they can do the mission, they can do the ideas that they will have that we haven't even thought of yet without some of the constraints perhaps that we have today. And so we started going through this property process and we started looking at the options. Can we rebuild? What is this all about? And over the last 2 AGMs, I've kind of reported on that. You will remember that 2 AGMs ago, we presented what was a physical redevelopment plan. And if you put up this next slide, Junie, I think you might remember the little document that we put out there. It was the idea around doing a physical redevelopment. What would it mean for us, perhaps, and what could it look like? Is it even possible? And that following year, we really said to ourselves, is it possible? Is there an idea that we could do this? And at that point, we were introduced to Strategic Property, and I'll introduce them to you shortly, who are a subsidiary of Alvarium. And Alvarium are most famously known for being the chief sponsors of Team New Zealand. You'll see their name on the side of the boats. Sail GP. Yeah, I love Sail GP. It's my dream to sit on one of those boats one day. Could that be arranged? Okay. Anyway, we were introduced to Strategic Property and they've been excellent guides for us. We had a little team of people that effectively became, I guess, the governors of our process around that, making sure that we were considering the right options, talking about the right things, and so we've been doing that. And at the end of that first year, so at our AGM last year, we really answered the question, according to the information that we'd received. And they said, yeah, it looks like it's possible to be able to do something. So last year I said we were going to embark on a process that really answers the question, but is it really possible? I mean, it kind of looked possible, but is it really possible? Which just required a lot more work, a lot more feasibility, a lot more due diligence, a lot more looking at who we are and what we've got and what's available. Now, there's no question that over the last couple of years the world has changed in a lot of ways. And particularly in property, if you follow the property market and interest rates and all of those different things. So we're in no rush right now to be talking about this, but we have been following a process. And what I want to do before I sort of ask for any questions is have Jo come and speak from her perspective, because she's been, and Kennedy have been the ones that we have been talking with their team. And just to give you an idea of who they are, Strategic Property, I wrote this firsthand, or cutting and paste it from their Google anyway. Strategic Property provide broad experience with in-depth property knowledge, and they take a collaborative approach to deliver quality projects. They have the know-how and the networks to realise the vision, concept, development and execution of any property project, large or small. Their clients range from private development companies, sovereign funds, high net worth individuals, family offices, government agencies, listed companies, debt funders, iwi, and churches. So a broad spectrum of experience within that market. And Jo McDonald, some of you may know, in fact, is a director of strategic property. She's got 20 years of experience in residential, shopping centre and commercial property industry. She's worked on many construction projects across Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch, and has a record of delivering strong results across different international markets, which is excellent. And with Jo is Kennedy, and Kennedy is an assistant development manager. She's joined Strategic Property in 2022 and is a great guide and is learning lots herself as part of this process as well. So we have valued their experience over the last couple of years. So I'm going to hand over to Jo to come and share a little bit from her experience and her knowledge of what we're about here at Windsor Park. So welcome, Jo.
Thank you. Well, the good news is Kennedy hates speaking in public, and I was going to make her introduce herself, so she's got to leave past because Grant's already done it. But anyway, look, thank you for the introduction. And my job is, or our job, sorry, I shouldn't say my, it's definitely our, is to sit there and be people who challenge and really kind of just help articulate and support and keep the journey going and keep moving. Development naturally feels incredibly exciting and insanely frustrating all at the same time. There's the cheesy thing of you hurry up and wait, and you are constantly going, we've got this vision, and now we're going to sit there and check if it's the right thing to do. We want to build this thing, and now we're going to just double check that this is exactly what we want to do. So this AGM, where Grant said we're not talking about vision and we're going to reflect on what the journey's been and do all the sort of statements of fact and all that kind of stuff, that's part of what the property bit is at the moment. What we've done over the last year is work with the senior leadership team here and the I think there's a committee that's set up to it. Yeah. So we had we've had a number of different meetings, and we've really started to talk about the challenge of what we want to do. And Kennedy and I are then going to try and sort of articulate that and then be able to demonstrate, you know, what that is and what that looks like. So we're working with you. We're like we're going to be arm in arm and the wingman, but we're also the people that are going to be able to stand back and go, but are you doing the right thing? Are you doing what you've always done? Which actually for this church is pretty good, let's be frank. But, you know, is this going to be your best thing? Like, number one, don't put sprinklers in this building. This building's stuffed. Just as people who install sprinklers into other buildings, it'll be north of $1 million easily every day of the week because it's just hard, right? Like, it's an old building. I remember the first service here when the church was the pub and the carpet did smell awful, and Brian's going, we've got a vision, it's going to be fine, it's going to be a great building and a great legacy. And it is. So I'm jumping around because I've got very scrambled notes. But here's my thing. Number one, when you're doing a development journey, the first thing you want to do is ask yourself a whole lot of questions. What are we here to do? Who are we here to serve? You know, I think, Margaret, I think you mentioned the whole idea of thriving and surviving. There are a number of churches we're dealing with at the moment that are in survival mode, or, you know, a number still who are actually in, we didn't survive and actually our building's now being disposed of, what can we do? It is so cool to stand here in a church that is in thriving mode. And thriving mode opens up opportunity mode. So we're thriving, that's a big tick. We've got a vision. Let's check and articulate what that is. What I want to be able to do, and my challenge to Grant and the team in the next sort of 6 months, is that every one of you can articulate what the vision is for this church in terms of the development journey. Now that's going to, and I'm Margaret, I'm going to put you on, where did you go? You're there. Can I make an educated guess on something? You said you moved to Auckland in 2011. Did you come from Christchurch? Oh, 2013 from Hamilton. Okay, cool. So I was going to make an assumption that's clearly wrong. So there you go. That's why you asked the question. But do any of... Oh, right. Okay, cool. So I was going for the post-earthquake movers because there was a lot of people moved to Auckland post that. Anyway, I'll stand corrected. I should get to know you better. If you think about Christchurch, one of the things they did that was a really, really good thing was when they had this disaster come through. So earthquakes come and flatten the city, and that was just the most incredible, humbling experience, I think, for all the people there, and it changed their world forever. What they did, though, and I think what was really cool for a community exercise, was they went through the central city blueprint. And part of the blueprint was Sir Bob Parker stood there and he said, I want everyone to bring their post-it notes. And I want you to get your post-it notes and I want you to talk about what you see as your vision for the city. Out of that came, the idea of having the stadium. It had the idea of, we want our residential in the eastern frame. We want a cool hospital. We want a cool convention centre. We want all of these big things. What it did do, though, is it distilled the idea that every person in Christchurch got an opportunity to comment on what they wanted their future to look like. So we've talked to Grant, and what we want to do is a similar kind of thing. And what we really want people to do with that, and this is all coming, so this is like judge me next time when we present at the AGM in 2025, we want you to come and tell us what you want. What do you see? And it's not just a building. We're not designing the building at the moment. We're designing the brief. The brief, and this is my straw man, a fully functional, future-proofed facility, because I think it's more than a building, it's buildings, which houses more than just the church, because you're the church, you're Equip, you're Windsor Park Hub, and Life Care, sorry. All of those things go to create the church community that Windsor Park is. But then I've added onto it that feels like yours and you want to share it with your community. So that's where I'm going to start as a straw man provocation for the team around here. It's got to be community focused. And then from there we're going to go, how do we then distill that vision down? We've asked the pastoral team to come back with, when you went to Westlake during COVID, what did you miss? What did you need? What did you miss? Because when we always, who's renovated a kitchen? All right? When you renovate your kitchen, you almost by default rebuild what you had because that's what you're familiar with. Whereas then your friend comes along and says, I've just bought this new oven. I've gone for the 900 wide versus the 600 wide. I've gone for the wall one rather than the normal kind of, underbench one. That's the things you want to think about. So we said to the youth team, did you have what you needed? The children's ministry, did you have enough space? What did you like? What didn't you like? Did you like the one service, two services? How do you set yourself up? Our job is to just keep questioning that. Because then what we're going to do, after a lot of talking, we're going to get a really solid brief. And the brief then goes to actually how do we scope out the project, how do we get the design, and then how do we actually build it. Spoiler alert, the building's the easy bit. Okay? The last thing we want is people go on this journey and get to the end and go, if only we'd done this. So we're going to avoid that. That's our plan. So what that sort of looks like, other than a lot of talking in the next 6 months, is working with you over probably I'm again going to just manage the expectations. It's not going to happen overnight, but it will happen. So we're going to channel out in a Pantene ad. Rachel Hunter would be proud. We're going to put together a brief. From the brief, we're then going to come through and we're going to get some plans. And they're going to be checking number one, do you want to stay on this site? Right? The standard assumption going in now is you do stay here, but if an amazing proposition came along tomorrow, then we're going to have a chat, right? Because that's all about just checking what it is. The second thing is, please don't be discouraged, but the last couple of years have been absolutely the most awful time in the planet to develop anything, so we're okay, right? The fact that no spades are in the ground is totally fine. It costs a fortune to build. It costs a lot more 2 years ago than it does today. And the price of land is also currently at an all-time low. So if we're going to try and potentially sell part of this to fund this development, you didn't want to sell it in the last 6 months or probably in the next 6 months. The guys next door, we know they've got their land on the market. We understand why they're doing it. They've come and had a chat, with Grant and us and the team. But it's not a great time to sell. And their land isn't zoned, okay? Your land is, so that's a big tick. But right now, it's at an all-time low for land value. So again, we're just not in a rush. Because the last thing we want is everyone goes, but you sold it in the down part of the market. Okay, this is the time we can hurry up and wait. We can ride this out, we can have a look at what's going to come, and, you know, next year's looking a lot better. You know, there's a lot of survive till 25. That's currently the plan. From there, once we've got the brief, done all the questioning and done all that kind of stuff, we're then going to come up with the full design and the budget and the scope, and then we're going to build it. So this is the kind of thing of, it is a journey, and we just want to probably, I think Grant's comment to me was, try and manage everyone's expectations. You know, there's no spades in the ground next year. There's probably not spades in the ground in 2026. But by next year, we'll have a plan, we'll know what it costs, and we'll be able to present what you can afford to do. It's basically my theory. My other one was, when you're going away and you're thinking, wow, that's a lot, or maybe that's not a lot, what I really want people to be able to start thinking out is, what is your vision that you see? You know, Windsor Park is absolutely world famous throughout New Zealand for being the church that bought the pub. To be fair, that was an excellent idea and an excellent, you know, this has created the legacy you've got now. It's really hard sometimes when you're doing your kitchen renovation to think, what do I need to do as the steps? But it's easy to see what it looks like. Is it white? Is it black? Is there tiles? What's your splashback look like? Have I got Melee appliances or Fisher and Paykel? All of those kind of things. This development is no different. When you're thinking about it and pondering it, what does the future look like? Is it a big building? Has it got a chapel? Has it got a big auditorium? Who's in there? Where do they park? Because we all know that car parking is critical to every development. And when you take it away, everybody hates you. So we need to think about that. And we really want you to think about what your vision is, so that when we then come back and have these kind of sessions on what it is, who are the users? Who's coming? What's the next part of the legacy? You know, you've got Windsor Hub, you've got Equip, you've got Life Services. What's next? Who else is coming? How do we build for them too? So that's where we're coming back to. The current plan, is the fully functional, future-proofed buildings that are more than just a church, that feel like yours and you want to share it with your community. So that's the plan. Now, any questions? And I'm happy to keep talking. Yep. Yes. Yes.
So my name is Paul. Thank you for taking my question.
Yeah.
You spoke about the land that's for sale over here, and you also spoke about the value of land being very low at the moment. Mm-hmm. So putting those two together, is that something that Windsor Park should look at buying, could look at buying, and implications about that particular property? It's not zoned.
Sure. So can I answer those in sort of three parts? So can we look at buying it? We can. Do we need it is probably the second part of the question, because I think part of the challenge here is you've already got a really big piece of land. That bit of land isn't zoned yet. So it's currently zoned as technically zoned as zoned recreational reserve. They're going for mixed use housing urban. The surrounding land to that is mixed-use housing suburban. So all of the Noel Williams Place subdivision up the back, that's mixed housing suburban. What that means in real layman's terms is you can put one house per 400 square metres, whereas on the urban zoning you can do one house per 300 square metres. The church land here is zoned what's called THAB, which is the Terrace Housing and Apartment Buildings Zone, which means you can do much, much higher density. So in theory, this land here is far more valuable than the mixed housing urban land next door, in theory. In practice at the moment though, THAB's been the bit of land that people are a bit iffy on buying because you've got to build apartments. And at the moment, because, well, sort of all 3 or 4 level high rises and stuff, because of the price of land and then the price of building, there have been the developments that haven't been as economical in the last couple of years. The view is in the next few years that should change. So we know that they're selling it. At the moment, our advice to Grant has been, you've got enough land, you want to control your own destiny right now, let them go to the market and see what happens. It doesn't mean that it doesn't end up being a deal, but at the moment, my personal view is I think it will just complicate things for the minute, while they need to go and test the market and just see what the market comes back and tells them. Because the market's then got to comment on land that isn't zoned right, has still got to go through a planning journey, and then it's being sold at a really niggly time in the market. So they've got 3 challenges there, and the view we probably are taking is you've got enough to control your own destiny. That's a nice to have, but not a need to have. Yeah.
So it's in the Baileys, that's how I found out about it,
Yes,
the Baileys.
it is, yeah.
Every 3 month commercial property.
The total property,
And
yep.
you read that, and who are the vendors?
So the vendors, yeah, that's a very complicated question. The vendors at that moment, so the Windsor Park is a joint rugby and cricket club, and they've got a trust board that sort of runs it, and the trust board there are the vendors. So they've taken a long time to get to the point where they, and this with their own words, not my words, to get to the point they've got an acknowledgement they want to go through and look at their future focus for that area. So their future focus is obviously in the sports and recreation. So they want to build like a big changing room that will be a multifunctional between cricket and rugby. But in the first instance, so they've identified to do that, they need some money. The only way they're going to get the money is to sell some land. They've still got to go on a journey with the agents and just see what the market gives them as feedback.
Add one comment to that, Paul. We have met with them many times. We actually know roughly what they want for that land, and so we're okay not buying it.
Yeah, that. There's a big dollar differential between parking, recreation and mixed houses and urban, but you've got to get the zoning first, and that zoning is going to be tricky. Sorry, yes.
Hi there, thanks for the presentation that you've done. 2 questions.
Sure.
First one is with regards to the brief, and thanks for the explanation about the vision process and the ownership of it. In a percentage basis, how far would you say we as Windsor are along in that brief process?
So I'm going to put a percentage on how far you're along on the brief process.
Yep.
The brief being the first part of the development process. Yep. It's actually a really hard percentage, right? Because I'm going to say probably about 50%. Because the brief is the brief isn't the scope, right? The brief is we want to have a new church. So I think part of the challenge is we need to agree that this building's poked or munted for the very technical terms that can go onto it. But very okay. After Christchurch, you're allowed to use the word munted on national TV. So I'm sure in an AGM it's approved. What that means though is it's still fine to occupy it for now, but it's not going to be your long-term home. If that's a big part of the brief. It then goes to, do we want to stay on this site? That part is largely answered, which is yes, unless there's an amazingly compelling proposition that says otherwise. So we want a new building, we want to stay in the same location. That's half of your brief done. The further part of the brief is then just defining, okay, so then what else do we see? Who else is coming in? What kind of areas do they need? And then that overarching brief is then going to get further defined into the scope, which is the bit we're going to go through in the next 6 months.
Okay, so my second question, hopefully is easy to answer. Looking at that picture up there, which is the buildings from up above.
Yep.
If we stayed here, is it a 100% dozer sort of thing? You're going to put a bulldozer through the lot? Or is there like the cafe that you'd say, oh no, we'd save it sort of thing?
So that's a really interesting question. And probably the biggest challenge is people always see something they've renovated or added onto or the addition as having inherently a lot of value. The challenge is, so Cafe Windsor was built in 2011-ish, 2014? Oh, before that, okay. So you've got a building there that's probably been there for 15 years, and who's going to correct me? We're going to go with 15? About that? Okay. Okay, so we'll call it 15 years. 15 years by the time we get to doing the development is probably 20 years. A lot of the stuff that goes into buildings has got a kind of lifetime of, it's got to last technically under the Building Act for 50 years, but by the time it's getting to 20, you're into doing the renovations. Then the next challenge is you've then got to tie that into the rest of it. One of the other things I really want to challenge in the brief is I think you could have what we're going to call continuous trade, because it's my retail background, but you can go from this building to a new building. So when you displace people off a site, as you would have learnt with the floods and having to relocate to Westlake, it changes people's habits, and we want to try and make sure that this is a pleasant journey. When you renovate your kitchen, you normally end up having to do your cooking in the bathroom or outside on the barbecue. Everyone's got their horror stories. We want to try and make this work. So it's not to say that we haven't considered keeping that part, but I think it's going to end up being probably harder than what everybody expects and ultimately not worth it. What is the size of the land that the church is on? 13 hectares. 2.4 hectares.
My name's Kate. Is there a possibility that we could invite Carey College to join us, and has that been discussed?
I'll answer that as chair of the board of Carey College. Yes, I've put several hats on in those discussions. Carey itself has been on a process in the last 5 years of its own strategic direction, and has arrived at a position in the last year where Carey has sold its current buildings, the Baptist Union buildings, but we want to maintain a city fringe location. So really we had talked about, is there the possibility for Windsor co-location? Was there the possibility at Manukau Central as well, as being two churches with a bit of land? Carey board would currently, with the Baptist Union support, currently say that no, we want to be city fringe, which is generally not on the North Shore. As much as both the chair of the board, the principal, the executive officer and several other staff work on the shore, live on the shore, we were all for it, but anyway, that's not the way it worked out. So it has been discussed, but it won't happen.
Can I add something to that though? Part of the brief though is also thinking about what do you see the rest of the site being used at, and is there anything you particularly love or you particularly hate? Because the I hate bit is actually very, very interesting, because if everybody around here said, for example, I just cannot handle the fact that there might be houses on here, then there's going to be a strong message. I would openly suggest you probably do want to see some houses on here, but this is that part of that thinking and part of that brief. So that's the other 50% we've got to really sort of dig into a bit more. Cool, sorry, I'm going down here first. Yes?
Hi, I'm Tina, and I just wanted to know, have you talked to Rangitoto College, because they tended to use part of our facilities and things like that to hold extra classes and things like that as a extra revenue stream? Is that something we're thinking of as well?
So Grant can answer that probably more accurately, but my answer to that would be no, we haven't talked to Rangitoto, or we haven't. Have you guys talked to them specifically about that? Okay, there's sort of brief and potentially ongoing discussions about that, but part of the whole concept of having the fully functional building is that there is the ability to have, Rangitoto College and or everyone else. You have Downer come in here once a month and do their health and safety and their toolbox talks. Having people being able to come in and use your facility during the week is a great idea. So that's part of having that multi-purpose kind of, fully functioning site, is having that optionality coming through. So Rangitoto as a specific user, but in the generic idea, yes, we have thought about how you can get like that just broader use of the church. Yes.
A question about our 2.4 hectares. Is it all equal land? Can you choose to build anywhere, or is the car park, specifically car park and things like that?
So that's a really good question. There is part of the car park you can't build on. So that's there's the area down sort of to the western side of the chain. The chain's not there anymore. The chain used to be there. The chain's not there anymore. There's a natural line down the car park where there's some shared car parking spaces. It's about 200 odd. About 200 odd that are shared with the rugby club and cricket club. Not to discriminate between rugby and cricket. That cannot be built on. It's got to be used as car parking. So there's an easement there that requires that land stays predominantly as car parking. Potentially, you could put something in a structure, although just to be clear for anyone from the rugby club listening, we have not got any plans to do that at this point in time. But the rest of it is owned by Windsor Park outright and, you know, freehold title. We can do what we want.
Can I ask a question in terms of if we were going to bowl the existing buildings, how many levels could you go up under the existing permit for the land?
4 or 5, depending on where the height plane sits.
Thank you.
Hi there, my name's Jan. You said how you had the local community, or someone objected to just adding on to the church.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know to what point we would get to that we would run into that problem again? Because it seems if you're going to go down that path, yes, we'll do 5 stories, 4 stories high, whatever,
Yeah.
and then the local community object, and you've spent quite a bit of time, energy and money, obviously,
Sure.
trying to sort that.
Yeah.
Do you know where your limitation is on that?
Yeah, so I was just about to ask that clarification. So when that person objected, it was under the old planning rules, not the new planning rules. So once the unitary plan came in, the council allocated this land a THAB zone. Basically, and I'm going to go planning 101 for anyone who is bored, feel free to switch off. But under the planning rules, under THAB, you've got a sort of as of right ability to do a bunch of things. So the first one is you can do sort of 4 or 5 levels high. The second part of that is as long as you comply with things like setbacks and height in relation to boundary and all sorts of other rules, you can then go and enact your development. Now, we've got to get a resource consent, but if we're building something that is within the framework of what the plan assumes you're going to do, then you are okay to keep doing that, and it's unlikely you'll get the objections. So knowing that there's a sensitivity to the boundary, we'll have to make sure we've got like a really good landscaping buffer, we've got all the right setbacks, we do all of the things that comply, but then the council have to actually, you know, work alongside us to then go and say to the neighbours, well, look, this is actually part of what the zone allows them to do. Yeah, and it's Grant's right, there's town centre planning behind us. So part of the challenge is this is quite a transitional part of the North Shore. So what it used to be is not going to be what it is in the future. So it's just taking the community along on that journey. But also, you know, when we leave the legacy, it's not just the legacy of the church building, it's also the legacy of what the rest of the land is going to be used for. And we need to ensure that that's something that everyone here is proud of as well. And there are things that we can do to make sure that, you know, if some gets sold to a developer, that developer has to do something that everybody's still happy with. Sorry, down here, yes.
Hi, I'm Russell.
Hi, Russell.
Has the car park has a lot of space it could be built on top of?
Mm-hmm.
Has that been considered?
So that is in the discussion. So at the moment, and again, just to be clear, there's lots of discussion, but there's no final plans. So one of the things we've talked about is with the land zoning gives you the ability to go up. Now, car parking is expensive to build. You've got a lot of car parking here. So one of the things we're really thinking about is how much car parking do we need? How do we need to build it? How are we going to cater for it? And then is that next to it in a structure? Is it underneath? Is it on top? Probably not on top. But, you know, like all the different things we've got to have a look at to think how are we going to best execute to our brief, and our brief is going to inform our scope. So this is that workshop discussion that we're going to have. Oh, sorry. Yes. Run, Caleb, run.
I'm coming.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I was just wondering, as part of the feasibility study that you've already done, have you got to the point of knowing how much of our land you would expect to have to sell to be able to do about the kind of thing we want to be able to do?
Yes and no. So we've got to the point we have worked out we're going to need to sell some of the land, but we haven't defined exactly what that bit would be, because before we come up with some, we've done some high level testing to make sure that we think this is going to work, but we haven't defined exactly. It'll be like, you know, this section here, but not that section there, or whatever. So there's no final decisions on that. There's just a couple of high level assumptions that we'll continue to work on in the next few months on that. Anyone else?
No. So thanks for asking those questions, and the beauty, and thanks Joe and Kennedy for coming and willing to be present here today, because I wanted them to answer those questions because I'm used to answering them, and I think it's great for you to know that there are experts involved in this. I have experience but no expertise would be my point in that, and these guys, because of the work that they're doing across, not just in commercial sector, but give us an example of another, like you're working with an iwi at the moment. Tell us about that sort of process, because it's probably not much different than a church.
So we're working with an iwi down in the Waikato. No, we're doing a big social housing development, well, sorry, big for Waharoa. 40 social houses in a community centre down in a little township just north of Matamata. And we're doing exactly the same thing, where we went and did a presentation to the whole of the Waharoa community. We did two. We did the hui on the marae there, and had a really in-depth discussion about the brief we had been given in that one, and then how we've scoped it, and then what the plans were. And part of that is actually really making sure everyone's coming on the journey with us. And we too got through an AGM with no nays. Everybody endorsed the plan. But it was just to try and get to the point where everyone goes, this is what we want, and this is how we see what we see good looking like. But as the broader community, we're happy to accept this, and we want to live there, which is also part of it too. Because this is 40 houses going into a community with probably 200, maybe 200 other houses. So it's a really, really big tipping point for that community, and we've got to make sure we do it really well and get everybody engaged.
Another question for either of you to answer, probably. When we got involved with you, you invited us up to your offices, which are second to top building in the new KPMG building. We all suffered from imposter syndrome. Why do you guys do this? Why would you help a church, or an iwi? We're pretty small fry in the scheme of things, and probably more difficult to work with than most. Why does strategic property do this kind of work?
Do you want to answer that? This is the bit we enjoy. So I was thinking I might get asked this question on the way up as I was driving back from my holiday early. Thanks, Grant. So I was at, this is a short story, but I want to share it with you. About so maybe 2013, I was asked by the Aspiring Leaders Forum to go down and talk and I'm gutted Mel's left actually, because she would have enjoyed this, but as a young woman who's been in business and does all this, I've got a high flying job, which was pretty cool. But one of the questions that came from a young person is, but what do you do to give back to the community? And that's always stuck with me. And it's not that we do this just to give back to the community, but we do it because we enjoy this kind of stuff. We had the privilege of hosting Caleb and I've forgotten his name. Who is that? Who's the guy? Ethan, and all the national youth pastors who came up and shared our view, and we gave them dessert and tea and coffee and all that kind of stuff. But like we love working with people who actually are thriving and are really have that vision and that journey and that legacy. We enjoy the whole thing that, and Mel challenged us, who we just met when we were sitting down there. She was saying, if it wasn't for the churches, there would be a huge amount of social need that is just going unmet. And look, when you work in the corporate world, which we get to build hotels and we get to build all sorts of cool shopping centres and all that kind of stuff, which is awesome. But we actually enjoy doing the stuff where you are helping people who are really on the ground doing the other stuff. So I guess our view is, if that's what we can do to help, on that journey, then we can bring some skill set to that, then that's what we're keen to do.
Thanks. That's great. By their applause, really, they're asking if we can have our next AGM in your offices. I've never looked down on a cruise ship, but you do from your offices. It's very interesting seeing people swimming in the pool. Anyway, if there's no other questions, Kennedy, you haven't spoken anything. What's the best thing about working at Strategic Property for you? You've been there a couple of years now. Tell us.
Well, to give some context, I guess I joined Jo probably 3 years ago after doing a property degree at Auckland Uni. So she kind of took me under her wing, and I jumped in and have been exposed to so many projects over the last 3 years, doing some residential, retail and commercial. So such a range of projects, and great for my career and work experience. So that's awesome.
And just for context as well, I think Kennedy lives in Castor Bay, Campbell's Bay, and Jo lives in Northcote Point. So they're shore people as well, and so when we started talking about the site, they both knew it for different reasons as well. But yeah, not all the good reasons. Not when it was a pub. No, nothing like that. Great. Well, thanks for coming and speaking, and feel free to chat to them afterwards if you'd like to as well. But thank you. Before Jo and Kennedy came, I sort of said, come up with any questions. At the AGM, it's kind of a little bit of a mix of looking back for 2023 and celebrating that, which we do through our annual report, but also looking forwards. And we're in a little interesting position for us in the church right now, I kind of feel personally speaking. Obviously the property is a big topic of conversation for us because it's an intergenerational project. The way that I'm approaching this is that what we do in this space is, in my language, for my children's children, who are obviously in creche right now, in preschool. So what are they going to have when they are in their 20s or 30s and hopefully still serving in the church? What is that? So it's an intergenerational project that we're talking about. What's a building going to be good for the next 50 to 100 years? So getting this process right, I think, is really important for us, and getting to that stage one day where we sort of look back and think, we did a good job of that. And that for that generation in 30 or 40 years' time, there won't be too much of, I wish they'd thought about this back, So that's a big project for us looking forwards. As far as a community of faith goes, obviously we keep trying to be as, I guess, prophetic as we can be about the role of the church into the future. And you'll know that as a community of faith, we have always been like that. So I often see my role as a leader is to continue the story that we are part of. And I guess in the tenure that I've been around, and I know Cafe Windsor is older than 15 years because I've been here 15 years, and Cafe Windsor was around when I arrived, well and truly. So it's probably closer to 20, which is interesting thinking about that time. It shows how long some of you have been around, right? You remember building Cafe Windsor. But for us, over the last little while, and particularly through the COVID years, and thinking about the ways in which the world has changed and in which the way the world will continue to change, that's always our prayer. And it's always the thing that we are talking about, not just as staff, but as we're talking about with our ministry teams. And we're always, I guess, doing what Jo talks about with our property. We're always challenging ourselves. Just because we've done something for the last little while and perhaps it's been good doesn't mean that we need to keep doing it the same way for the future. Always challenging ourselves. At its heartbeat, how do we keep people growing spiritually? How do we keep people close to God? And if it's such good news for us, how do we keep being that people in our community in creative ways? Which, as I read our annual report, and I'll say it publicly because I say it privately, I'm very humbled to be a part of that wheel. When you look at our annual report, and I can tell you this, I move in the church world, there isn't really another church in our nation that has the width and the depth of its connection with its community in the ways that we do. And we are working in some powerful areas. And I often tell those stories. And, as Baptist churches as well, we are very socially minded. We are very intentional about seeking integration into our wider community. And the width of what we have, the width of what's been planted for, many decades now, is something for us to be grateful to God for, and something that we need to keep our focus on. I often say to young pastors, I'm at that stage where I mentor some younger pastors, and I'm like, the biggest thing you can do when you start in a church is understand the DNA and the story of your particular context. Read every annual report, I say to them. Speak to people that have been around for a long time. Listen to the stories. What is the unique aspect that God has placed within that church? Because we are all one church ultimately, but every congregation has its own features, its own factors. That's what makes us different. And I think when we look back at our history, we have always been a church that has moved with courage and has not been scared to give things a try, to plant, to call it a day when it doesn't work, but to learn from those experiences and to keep being creative about how we engage with the good news of the gospel in our world. So moving forward, we are always asking that question. Last month, as pastoral leaders, we sat around and came up, pretty much every one of us has a strategic review going on around our areas, asking some big questions about what it looks like to be the church moving forwards. Too many really to list, but that's kind of our daily lives for those of us that are in leadership here, working with the people around us and asking those questions and testing our own assumptions. So it's not just in property, it's in all of the different activities of who we are. It's something that each one of our ministries go through. I know for Equip, you saw I sit on all of these boards, all asking themselves the question strategically every year. Who are we and what are we about? What do we maintain? What do we start? What does the future look like? I know for Equip being, I guess, the most mature of our other entities, with a change of government, what does it look like with a change of government? What does that look like for policy renewal? What's the government saying around mental health in our nation? How's it going to invest? What's its philosophy around that? Naomi's always asking that question, so the board wrestles with those questions, and it's the same for the others as well. The Hub and Lifecare have a strategic day coming up shortly to talk about those things, the ministries that they have right now. Are they the right ones? Are they positioned in the right areas? What else do we feel God might be leading us into? And so that always involves multiple different people, not just the boards, but ministry leaders and volunteers as well. So whilst this environment necessarily isn't always the best for those discussions happen a lot. And I often say that because it's impractical in this size gathering. But invite us to life groups. Heather's made that. I love coming to life groups because they get a good supper, which is always fun. But if you want to talk in your life groups, I'm very willing to come to life groups and share what's on our hearts and answer questions about that. We often say some of the best time that we spend with people is our one-on-ones. Since Cafe Windsor's been in quarantine, Cafe Constellation is my second office these days. I meet people there a lot, talking about what's on their hearts and how that works and how do people get involved. What are their gifts and abilities? How does that work for us? So, those discussions as part of being brothers and sisters happen in multiple different ways, and they're always listened to, and we talk about that a lot. I think as pastoral leaders and as elders, we are always having those discussions together. So I don't really have, interestingly for me, too much big picture stuff to kind of talk about right now. Property is it, but coming out of COVID, coming out of the floods, the strategic side of who we are is something that we are always talking about. But I do want to, you are welcome to ask any question of me or anybody else right now as part of an AGM if you have any questions that you'd like to ask. I'll give a little bit more time than Margaret gave.
The parts with the floods, is there any more things you need to fix up to make no more floods occurring?
No, we're pretty well done with floods. We've just negotiated our final settlement with the insurance company over a year later. But no, we're pretty good. We've sort of identified the causes of the floods, why that happened. We've redirected one of our big downpipes to another drain. And we kind of understand why we flooded, and we've sought to do some remedial action. But at the end of the day, as we all know, those floods were kind of once in a couple of years these days. I'd say once in 100 years, but they happen every couple of years now. And we would hope that we would be protected. We kind of really, the time of the day was for the big flood, was we didn't anticipate the water flooding over those gardens and blocking the drains out the side of Cafe Windsor there. When that other big rain came, we were all on site during the day, and you might have seen a picture of us. We were all furiously unblocking drains as staff. It was good team bonding. That's the way that I look at it. So I think we're pretty well sorted from last year. Tina.
Just looking for the future, we've got our daycare centre and that. What about after-school care facilities for the actual schools around our area? Is there something that we could look at doing for hosting children so that people who have kids in daycare but also kids at school can do a pick-up from the one area because of the fact that their kids are in after-school care, and making it sort of more affordable, because it's actually quite expensive, I hear, from different people in daycare situations.
Sounds like something God's placed on your heart, Tina. These are my great discussions when people come up with ideas. How can we help you with that? yes, we've talked about that in the past. We've had plans for before school and after school care. Really, it's been about resourcing a lot of it and coming up really with the right people at the right times. So yeah, there's lots of ideas that kind of sit there that we have talked about, but yes, we certainly identify that being a challenge. Yeah, it's a good thing. I will note it down though.
Since receiving the email last year saying the buildings were going down, and we said we'll need help, $1,000 from each person from here, or give what they can. How is that going in the fundraising?
Yeah, we raised about a quarter of what we needed to at the time, but as it turns out, that was fine to get us through what we needed to get through. We were able to make a few repairs to what we needed to do, which was great, and some of that cost was actually to help the next stage of the project that we've been working through, and that's been covered as well. So yeah, it didn't probably raise as much as I had hoped, but in the great scheme of things, it's been fine, and I'm grateful to those that did contribute to it. Yeah, and look, economically, it's a tough time, right, for some people. So we certainly understand that. We often say we're grateful for the generosity of people that enables us to be who we are. We certainly are. We don't make any pressure around that. You know that. And one way or another, we seem to get through would be my story for Windsor Park. It seems to be in the story for a long time. That's the case. Yeah.
Sorry, I've got laryngitis.
Oh, you've got laryngitis, Colin, yes.
What's the attrition rate? There was some concern that the older people are very rapidly reaching 65 and not being able to contribute to offerings. And that was part of the decision to do finances differently.
The attrition rate? I mean, people dying.
No, people reaching 65 and their income changing, therefore their ability to do offerings.
That's a good question. I can't answer that. It's good. It's probably good. Yeah, I'm not really privy to that information, to be honest. It's a good question to think about, though, isn't it? Look, my general attitude is I don't know too much information about that stuff. And it's going to sound very spiritual of me, but one way or another, God seems to provide, which has been great. I think in a generalized way, we understand that right now it can be tough for younger people with mortgages. And so that's a challenge, particularly living in the area that we live. But if you don't have a mortgage and you have investments, it's a pretty good time. Returns are good, investments are good, and we are a congregation that has a wide spread of people. So actually we haven't really got our demographics of people coming up to 65. It's a good question, though. What we do find is some people are really reluctant to give us your dates of birth on our database. Some of you get really antsy about it when we ask every now and then for that, but it does help us with our demographics, to be honest. So if we ask for it again, give us your date of birth so we know. Yeah, I'm sorry, Colleen, I don't know the answer to that. If there's nothing else, I'm conscious that it is a nice day out there and it's a Sunday afternoon. What I would love, rather than I would love 3 people to put your hands up to come and pray through the microphone for us as a church community. Can be any one of you that can do that, rather than me. And I guess pray for wisdom for us all. You know, any of these big decisions that we've been talking about, it's always going to be a community decision. You know, what Joe's talked about, when we get down to the cutting edge of that, it's always going to be us together. It's not me, it's not the pastors, it's us as God's people. So, you know, there's a lot of work going on quietly behind the scenes, as I call in concentric circles, a few people, then a few more, then a few more. At some point with post-it notes, there will be the opportunity for a whole lot of people, which is great. And at that point, you know, obviously it's the community that makes those big decisions at the end of the day. Totally has to be that. So, you know, that'll be a process to pray for wisdom for as we move through that in this coming year. And then pray for market recovery. Pray that, you know, Retirement Villages sees this as a perfect place for upscale 10-storey vertical retirement village, and then we'll be sweet. I have asked, no, I'm not going to mention that rooftop bar idea. Oh, swimming pool. Or swim up rooftop bar. Is there 3 people that would like to come and pray for us as a community? So as a church, there should be 3 of you very quickly. Thanks, Tracy. 2 others? Thank you, Clay. Thank you, Shona.
Let's pray. Thank you, Lord, for this amazing project that is before us. We just ask you for wisdom for the people who are guiding this process. And Lord, we thank you for the ideas and the support that our members have given. We pray, Lord, that we would demonstrate unity and grace and vision as we come with our ideas. And Lord Jesus, we just lay this process before you. Would you provide the resources? And we thank you already for what has been done. We pray for good progress. We ask this in Jesus' name.
Lord, I pray that you continue to fill us with an enthusiasm and a passion to reach out into our community. I pray that we become a hub and the light on the hill for you, where people will come not only for help with their social stuff, but also that we can lead them to know that you love them and that you want to be in a relationship with them. And I do pray for wisdom for us, that fiscally we need to be really wise and sensible, but I pray that you continue to open doors that people give enthusiastically, because this is something that we all love and that we're all passionate about doing.
Thank you, Lord, for allowing us to have such a great history. Pray that we're able to go forward into the future and build upon that, and we pray that your will is done. Amen.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Enjoy your Sunday.